Welcome to the Bright Ideas Podcast.
John, welcome back to the show. It's good to have you back.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
So a lot going on in the world these days. And one of those things that you and I are going to talk about today is exiting a business, selling your company. You've put years into building it. You're maybe headed towards retirement or whatever thing you want to do after your business. You want to make sure that you get the best exit possible, which normally all on its own is challenging enough, but we've just come through this year of, worldwide pandemic, and that's had significant economic consequences for all sorts of business owners. So how do you think that's impacting trends that owners are going to see in terms of selling their business this year, next year, or 2 years from now, or what have you?
Yeah, well, I can tell you, actually, we've just done some research. I just looked at the data recently. We analyzed people who completed the Value Builder questionnaire, which is sort of like our in questionnaire prior to COVID being announced, and then the 8 months during the COVID period. And we pulled out about the end of November and looked at the data. And the pandemic has made some material differences too that come to mind. Number one, business owners have moved up their sell-by date by 20%. In other words, they're looking to sell 20% sooner. Number two, they're looking to sell to a third party. There was a time when business owners used to pass their business down to their kids. That was the way businesses were passed down from generation to the next. That no longer is the case, and the pandemic has made it even less likely. And we can riff on why that might be. My guess is, it's been such a difficult period for a lot of business owners that they don't want to pass the albatross on to their kids. And so the proportion of people who say they don't want to exit by selling to a third party is up over 56%. So it's a big change.
Yeah, no question. All right. So when it comes to selling, I've sold one. I guess you've maybe been witness to many. Let's talk about the mistakes that people commonly make, and then we'll talk about maybe how to avoid them, and then we'll talk about how to gain leverage during the negotiation process. So first of all, let's talk about mistakes. Lots of mistakes to be made when it comes to selling a company. What are the biggest ones?
Oh man, that was really the whole idea behind the book. I interviewed you on the show, Built to Sell Radio, years ago now. I've done like 300 interviews, and that was the kind of idea behind the book, is to distill the best practices and some of the mistakes, frankly, and try to provide a little bit of a playbook. I mean, one of the most common ones is getting lured into a proprietary deal. So M&A guys refer to it as a prop deal or a proprietary deal, where effectively you begin negotiating, oftentimes in a sort of benign, friendly way, with one buyer. It happens over a lunch or a dinner or an email or Zoom or whatever, where a buyer will compliment you on the business you built, say you're a fantastic company, this is amazing, let's learn more, let's partner, and then the conversation around partnership expands to something more deep, and ultimately gets to negotiation, to an exit. And that sounds great, and it sounds like a very fluid way to sell a company. The problem is the buyer knows they've got a hook in, and they know you're not negotiating with anybody else. And when that happens, two things tend to come out of that. Number one is the value they offer you is lower because they know they're not competing. But perhaps even worse, they tend to protract diligence, the period after you sign a letter of intent, before you do a purchase and share agreement. And at the end of that diligence, they know they've got you on the line. You bought the beach house or the ski house in your mind, and then they do what's called retrading, which is where effectively they lower the price. And oftentimes it's for no other reason other than they know they've got you. And those are just a couple of the kind of sleazy things that acquirers do to try to get your business for less than it's worth. But it all comes down to kind of avoiding this being the victim of a prop deal. That's one of the big mistakes people make.
So the takeaway there is make sure that if you're going to sell your business, you've listed it with a business broker or put it on an exchange someplace in some way, shape, or form to ensure that you have multiple buyers who are coming to look at the business.
Yeah, we've just done a bunch of research into business owners. Interesting stat: 76% of owners 1 year after selling say they regret the decision to sell. And when we unpack that as to why they regret the decision to sell, one of the four big reasons is they think they got taken advantage of. They're not sure if they left money on the table. And it's one of the most common things during the deal. You get this number and it's like 6, 7, 8 figures. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is like the most incredible thing in the world. People are going to pay me money for this dream I've had. And you get romanced into this entire sale process. At the end of it, you sign the deal, you put the money in the bank, and then you know, a year later, you're kind of rocking on the rocking chair and you think, what have I done? Like, did I leave money on the table? Yeah. And the only way you, I think, can eliminate that regret is to create some sort of market for your company. It doesn't have to be hundreds of buyers or even dozens, but like 2 or 3 legitimate buyers making an offer will give you a sense that what you're getting offered is fair market value. But if you get stuck in a prop deal, you may never know if you left money on the table. And so again, it's I think one of the most important things to do is to your point, get some sort of competitive marketplace going for your company.
And even before that, though, long before you ever get to that phase, there's a bunch of really important decisions that you need to be making. So let's set expectations for the average, small business. Let's say somebody's got a company that's doing between $1 and $10 million in revenue. So they're probably still very much the key man or key woman in that organization. They're feeling a desire to sell it for whatever reason. Maybe they're getting close to an actual retirement age. Maybe there's health issues, but maybe there's just, I'm feeling burned out. What should they be doing? Because to go and just call a broker today and say, list my business for sale, like that's literally the worst thing probably, maybe other than the prop deal, but that's one of the worst things I think that you could be doing. So how set expectations in terms of before you actually want to sell it, when do you need to start planning and preparing for the sale? And then what does that planning and preparation process look like so that during due diligence, you don't get overly distracted and end up seeing numbers nosedive when you're in the negotiation phase, and then you get fleeced, so that you can still run your business effectively and ideally even be growing it during the due diligence phase?
Yeah, I would use the analogy to answer your question of the idea of selling a home. Like when you go and sell your home, everybody's heard of staging, right? Where you buy the nice flowers or bake the cookies or whatever, make the house look good. That's all the kind of packaging stuff you can do when you are ready to sell your company. Prior to that, though, I would argue that you might want to consider renovating. So you might want to consider investing in the new kitchen that's going to have like a big premium on the value you get for your home. Similarly, there are some things that you can do that are more akin to renovation. So a lot of the stuff you talk about, Trent, is the idea of like building process, making your company run without you, building a business that's transferable. All that's what I would refer to as renovation. Those are big strategic projects that can take years. I think they're really valuable. I wrote a book about the whole topic years ago, so I feel really passionate about that process, but it does take time to bed in. So the kind of big renovation project you want to do is making sure your business can thrive without you personally doing all the work. And again, processes and documenting your processes are a big part of that renovation project. Once the renovations are done and you've really got a business that's thriving without you personally pulling all the shots or calling all the shots, then I think it's time to fluff or preen the business or make it look as pretty as possible. And some of the things you can do there are what they call pre-diligence. You've probably heard of due diligence, where they vet the business and evaluate all the things you said. Pre-diligence is one of the most important things you can do because it's basically answering all the questions someone's going to ask in due diligence prior to taking the business to market. And I remember in the book I write about this, the guys from, have you ever heard of Barefoot Wine? Like if you ever go to like Trader Joe or
but I'm not a wine drinker. I don't even like wine.
Well, there you go. So probably not but Barefoot Wine was one of the kind of big, relatively inexpensive wines. They were a red wine to begin with, and they were available at Trader Joe and a lot of retailers in the United States. The guys behind that, Houlihan, the husband and wife team, they decided they were going to sell the company. And they knew that the biggest wine strategic acquirer in the wine business is Jay Gallo, that you've probably seen those guys, big, huge, wine company in the United States. So they knew they had one shot at getting it right. And instead of sort of approaching them in a haphazard way, they did a full pre-diligence project. So they got all their binders together, right? All the questions that they think they were going to be asked in advance. And when I asked the Houlihan's about this, I said, look, why did you do that? They said two reasons. One, we wanted due diligence to go smoothly. Two, and I think this is the more interesting reason, is because it signals to the acquirer that you're going to market. Mm-hmm. And they're going to have to compete to buy your business. So it's a very subtle, non-threatening way to say, we mean business. We're going to sell this company. You've got the first shot at it, but if you don't get it, someone else will. And again, it's one of those really subtle ways you can communicate to a buyer that they need to pay attention. And so the long story short, Gallo bought the company for a truckload of money, and they now live in a beautiful retreat and so forth. So in any event, it's one of the things you can do to kind of get the thing ready to go to market.